in anatomy, we have a particular way that we usually look at human bodies. And you'll notice how this woman is facing. She's pointed forward, so her face is coming towards us, and her arms are at her sides. You can see one arm over here with palm facing, one arm over here with palm facing, legs together, straight up. This is called the anatomical position. And whether we're looking at the person from the side, like this man is facing sideways, you can still see the palms are facing forward. Arms at the side, legs right close together. And with this anatomical posture, we call it, whoopsie, let's go back. With this anatomical posture, we then attribute directions to the different areas of that person's body. So notice how this individual is facing forward, and what we would think of as the right is actually the left. What we would think of as left is actually right. But you have to remember, for her, that arrow is pointing left. For her, that arrow is pointing right. And so when somebody is drawn in the anatomical position, couldn't think of the word for some reason, when somebody's drawn in the anatomical position, or when somebody's being studied in anatomy, they're usually pictures taken of them in the anatomical position. The right is their right. The left is their left. Not yet. I'll tell you when you need to start writing. Thank you for asking them. The middle of the person's body is known as the midline. Think of middle, midline. When we're referring to that center, we say that is the medial direction. When we're talking about something that is to the left or to the right of that midline, we say that is a lateral direction. So you have a lateral this way, you have a lateral this way. You could have a medial direction going inward that way, a medial direction going inward that way. And that allows us to look at a body in anatomical position and say, this organ is lateral to the midline. Look at the video of me. It's kind of backwards, so I have to pay attention. So you could say the lung is lateral to the midline. You could say the heart is medial to the lungs, which will be found right here. Now, when we're referring to something that is below that person, towards the bottom, usually referring to, we need to go over here to the right. When we're saying down towards the bottom, we use the word the inferior direction. So if I say, in what direction is the bladder in reference to a person's head? You would say the bladder is inferior to the person's head, because the head is up here and the bladder would be right here. So the bladder is below the head, so we use the term inferior. Now, if I want to know, well, where is the head of a human compared to where the bladder is? Well, you would say the head, which is up here, or let's just go over here, the head, which is up here, is superior, it's towards the top, superior of the organ, the bladder, which would be found right around here. Now, you may be thinking, why do we have these extra words for simple directions? Why can't we just say it's up from the bladder instead of saying superior to the bladder? Well, person's able to move around, right? And a person can be lying down or could be standing up. They could be upside down for all we know. So we have to have words that take into account where the body is in relation to other body parts, irregardless of the direction the body is pointing or facing. So superior is always this way, inferior is always this way. Lateral is always this way, medial is always this way. Medial is this way, lateral is that way. Now, it gets a little bit more confusing when we're talking about limbs. And I'm going to give you all this stuff in notes in just a moment. I just want to go through all of them with you first. When you're talking about arms and legs, instead of using the words inferior and superior, we used much more complicated words. You're going to just admit distal and proximal. These words refer to where a body part is in relation to where it attaches to. So the shoulder right here attaches our body to our arm. And when we're referring to anything on that appendage, that arm, instead of using the word inferior and superior, because the arm can be like this, the arm can be like this, the arm can be pointing down like it is in this figure here. We can't use superior and inferior because the arms can move around in circular ways. All we care about is where is that body part in relation to where it's attached. So the hand refers to a part of the arm that is distal to the body. So it's further away from its point of attachment, and we say it's distal. If I want to say, well, where is the elbow in relation to the hand of a human? And the other direction, going towards, closer towards where it attaches, is the word proximal. So the elbow is proximal to the hand. It's closer to the area of attachment the hand is. Distal and proximal are going to be harder to remember. We're gonna quiz this stuff a lot. So I'm just giving you the information right now, and I know it's hard to see just in this video what these directions mean, and they can get very confusing, especially distal, proximal, inferior, superior. But now an easier set of terms to remember is these two, anterior and posterior. Something that is towards the front of a body is known as anterior. Something that is towards the back of the body is known as posterior. I like to think of the words post being it is behind, it's after something, posterior, and then anterior, before. Think of the word antes, right? Before. So anterior is in front, it's something towards the front of the body. Posterior is something towards the back. So you could say the chest is anterior to the spine. Or you could say the spine is posterior to the chest, which is anterior to the spine. Okay, so let's just write some of this stuff down, and then we'll talk about it a little bit, and then we'll quiz it over and over and over again. So all you have to write is capital A, directional terms for humans. Let me actually get rid of this because this just makes it confusing. Now is when you are writing. Directional terms for humans. Make sure you put that letter A in the front. If you have space on the first page, Just maybe leave a line or two, skip a line or two, and then continue with these notes. If you don't, just
Put
go
that on
on
the right side?
the right page. What was the question, Jason?
Do we put that in the right side or the left side?
So the notes go on the right hand side.
All right.
So this isn't the title, this is the actual note. Letter A, period, directional terms for humans. Underneath directional terms for humans, letter A, please write one period, superior. Make sure you underline superior. And it means upper or above. So remember, when something is above something else in the body, we refer to it as superior. If you want to color code it, that's actually a really good idea, Jose. You don't have to. But I've seen a lot of students use different colored pencils to write or different colored pens to write. Some students highlight the different terms. You don't have to do that, but that's a really good idea. It makes the notes much easier to read. Abigail, just skip a line or two, correct. Just before you start the notes for the day. And then you keep everything together. Okay, so superior means upper or above. So something that is lower in the human body or below is known as inferior. Think of those two words, superior, super, something else, inferior. To be inferior to something else, to be less than. So inferior is lower or below, superior is upper or above something in the body. Make sure you underline the word inferior. I think there's a little bug in here. It'll fly. I'm not losing my mind. Don't worry. Not yet. It's still early in the year. Now here's another set of words. In anatomy, when we're referring to something as towards the front or front, we use the term anterior. It's also referred to sometimes as ventral. Those of you who fish or have fished before may have heard the term dorsal fin or ventral fin. Ventral means it's toward the front of the fish, and they have a fin, and they'll call that the ventral fin. If it's on the back, it could be known as the dorsal fin, because something that is towards the back or on the back is known as posterior, sometimes also referred to as dorsal. Those are my lovely girls. Probably yelling at somebody who's walking in front of our house. Now, when something is towards the middle, we use the term medial. When something is towards the side, we use the word lateral. Excuse me, I'm going to make sure they keep quiet. So let's review what we have so far. When something is upper or above something else in the body, we use the term superior. When something is lower or below something else in the body, we use the term inferior. When something is towards the front of the body, we use the term anterior. When something is towards the back of a body, we use the term posterior. We can also use the term ventral for the front direction and then dorsal for the back direction. Remember the midline. When something is towards that midline, towards the middle, we use the term medial. And then when something is towards the outside or away from that midline, middle, by Mr. Leon, we use the term lateral. And we would use the terms like this. Remember, they're directions. So if something is like we're referring to the shoulder and saying, where is the shoulder joint compared to the midline? What term would I use to tell somebody else where the shoulder joint is compared to the middle of a human body? Out of those 6 terms, what would I say? The shoulder joint compared to the midline. What is the direction that would take me from the midline to that shoulder joint? Okay, Jose said medial. Any other thoughts? Thank you, Jose. So shoulder joint. The shoulder is in what direction in comparison to the midline? So we're starting here at the midline, and we're trying to tell somebody where to go to find the shoulder joint. What direction would we use? Roberto, thank you, says lateral. Any other thoughts? It's kind of hard to figure out how to use these terms. That's why we're going to practice them a little bit. Any other thoughts? We have medial and we have lateral. What do we think?
Interior crocodile alligator.
Fernando, you took yourself off mute. Did you mean to say something, or were you on accident? Okay, so let's look at this. The shoulder joint is to the side of this midline, right? If I start at my midline and I say, what direction do I need to travel in order to get here? I would have to travel towards the side, right? You're here in the midline, you have to travel towards the side to get to the shoulder joint. Ozzy said lateral, good. So the shoulder joint is lateral the midline. So remember, you have to think in terms of how do I get to the shoulder joint from the middle of the body? I have to go to the side. So I'd have to go in a lateral direction. Okay, what about this? The heart is in what direction from the lung? Let's just pick this lung. So the lung right here, the heart is in what direction compared to the lung? So you start at the lung. How would I get to the heart? What direction would I use? Okay, Ozzy, thank you, says, actually, Jose, thank you. And then Ozzy, thank you. Medial, Jose. Ozzy says medial. Any other thoughts? Stephanie says anterior, thank you. Any other thoughts? So if I want to go from the lung to the heart, what direction do I have to take? Stephanie says lateral. Yare says medial. Okay, so here's a heart. I'm sorry. Here's a lung. It's in there. See, fills up when I breathe. My heart is in the middle. It's in the midline of the body. So to get from the lung to the heart, I have to go in a medial direction. If I was saying, how do I go from the heart to the lung? That would be a lateral direction. So the lung is lateral to the heart because in order to get from the heart to the lung, I have to go in a lateral direction to the sides. Good stuff. All right. Now, there's two more terms. These are the tough ones. Or at least these are the most difficult ones to understand. All of these can be tough to learn, especially if you don't use them all the time, which you probably do. So 7 is a direction you use that tells us it is nearest to the point of attachment. This is known as the proximal direction. Please make sure you're underlining all of these directions. And like Jose brought up, color coding is a great idea if you have colors that you can use. Don't have to. This part of my arm, how do you say it? This part of my arm compared to this part of my arm, this part of my arm is proximal to this part of the arm. It says this location is closer to the attachment point than this one is. This part of my arm is further away from the attachment point than this part of my arm is. So we use the word distal to describe the direction away from the attachment point. Proximal describes the direction closer to the attachment point. This is particularly important when you're dealing with arms and legs. We do not use medial, lateral, superior, inferior when we're talking about arms and legs. We use proximal and distal. And that's because arms and legs can be in many different locations compared to the rest of the body. So all we're concerned with are, where are they in comparison to where they attach? And you may be asking yourself, why are we learning all of these funky directions? Well, when we get into class and we can start dissecting, you have to know these terms pretty good. And so we're going to spend the first couple weeks, actually this whole week, learning these terms because they're really important to know. And using them correctly when you're dissecting is incredibly important because you're going to be using sharp instruments that can do damage not only to yourself but to the specimen that you're cutting into. And you need to make sure you are cutting, opening, observing in the directions that I tell you in the procedures. And all of the procedures are going to be written using these directions because they're the best way to describe anatomical structures. I may tell you to look for a structure that is proximal to another structure. And so you'll have to look at the structure, see how it attaches to whatever we're dissecting, and you'll look for something that's closer to the attachment. Distal has to do with being away from that attachment. Same thing with superior and inferior. When we dissect a sheep heart, you need to be able to know these directions really well, and that'll be later in the year, because there's lots of different blood vessels you're going to have to identify, and I'll give you hints. I may say this blood vessel is superior to that blood vessel, and that's going to tell you a lot about where you should be looking. I may say, please make a dissection in the lateral direction of your specimen. And so you'll know that you have to start at the midline and make some type of a dissection towards the outer part of that specimen. And since I don't know which way your specimen is going to be oriented, you need to use these directions. I don't remember what's on my next slide. Nope, that's actually that little bit of information. Let me wait till that moves. So please make sure you put stars next to proximal and distal like you see in the notes. And please write this information underneath. This will be the last note you take today. Star, proximal and distal are for arms and legs.